RPGs across the lifetime of video games as a whole are known for the absurd amount of hours it takes to complete them. For the first playthrough, you're grinding for levels, talking to every NPC to figure out where to go, and completing every side quest you come across. So it makes sense that these times are cut down immensely in subsequent playthroughs. As for those who partake in speedrunning, they turn these into something that can be completed in a short gaming session. However, there are some games whose time barriers are much higher than others. Breath of Fire is a title which meets this criteria, having top times come in at 5 hours and some change. This makes runs like these not accessible to the normal player, but thankfully there's a solution. A hidden category that brings the time down to just a fifth of a normal run by simply using an Easter egg, which you can do on any Super Nintendo, Super Famicom, and Nintendo Switch Online copy of the game. This is something of an anomaly out of the games for the 1990s, as many speedruns are filled with exploits to cut down times immensely. Some use strategies like luck manipulation to control outcomes of enemy encounters, item drops, and even level ups. Others include massive glitches to skip straight to the final boss or credits. Sometimes there's even a little bit of both. Breath of Fire doesn't have any of this in a real-time setting, meaning beating the game as fast as possible doesn't break your childhood. However, this comes at the cost of a barrier to entry which can deter people from rating the game. For those who don't know what the premise of Breath of Fire is, let me explain really quick before I talk about the game's route. A race of humans who can turn into dragons, known as the Dragon Clan, lived in peace for many years. At some point, thousands of years ago, a goddess by the name of Tyr created tension among the dragon people by offering to grant wishes to them. This created a rift between those who wanted the goddess's favor and split the Dragon Clan into two factions, the Light Dragons and the Dark Dragons, both representing good and evil. The goddess was also scheming to escalate the fighting between the two factions, nearly ending the world in the process. However, one of the Light Dragons would rise up and imprison Tyr using 6 magical keys, which are now hidden throughout the world. As for the feud between the two clans, the Light Dragons were chased into hiding, where the events of the game begin thousands of years later in the town of Drogen, home of the last surviving Light Dragons. The story puts the player in the role of Ryu, who is currently living in Drogen. The town is eventually attacked by the Dark Dragons, and Ryu narrowly escapes from the ambush. The major antagonist of the game, Zog, or known as the Dark Dragon Emperor, not only wants to eliminate the Light Dragons, but also wishes to obtain the keys to release the goddess Tyr and conquer the planet. So it's up to you to stop him. In order to do this, players must traverse a massive world and gather the keys before Zog does. To obtain these keys, players will need to go through many towns, dungeons, and regions to complete quests, defeat bosses, and eventually fight Zog. But despite trying to prevent the keys from falling into wrong hands, things take a turn for the worst, and there's an in-game boss gauntlet that leads to the players fighting Tyr, the wish-granting goddess. Now there's a ton of strategies that runners use in and outside of battle to complete the game, first of which involves the consumable item Marble 3. This has the effect of preventing random encounters in many areas. Runners can purchase these throughout the game and is a huge time saver over dealing with these fights. One of the Any% speedrunning guides even goes as far to mention that this item is used at least 125 times in that specific route, further solidifying its importance to runners. Players can also take advantage of the game's dragon shrines through a strat called Death Warping. The shrines are the game's save points, and when all the party members die, the players warp back to the last dragon shrine they used, with no progress lost and a full heal. This is much faster than walking out of a massive dungeon after defeating a boss. Speaking of dragons, the main character can use a dragon transformation, giving access to great abilities and huge stat boosts. These help decimate bosses in the endgame, but I'll talk more about that later on. Now all this is cool and impressive, but what's the point of me explaining all of this? These strategies and more save huge amounts of time over not doing them, and it still leaves runners well over 5 hours in their completion times. Even in a tool-assisted setting, with the capability to play frame by frame and manipulate the best outcomes along with perfect play, the time doesn't go below 4 hours. So if runners can't break how the game is played, how do we get a category that's under an hour long? Oddly enough, the developers did us a solid and gave us a completely different way to break the run. In the early decades of game development, it was common for developer teams to leave secrets and jokes for players to discover on their own. There was no way to know these existed, so you either had to stumble across them on accident or read up on it in a gaming magazine somewhere. But as communication on internet forums and emails developed in the 90s, people shared their theories and actual finds related to those secrets. The developer of the Breath of Fire series, Capcom, was famous for having games with Easter eggs related to their flagship series at the time, Street Fighter. In Mega Man X, the player could unlock the Hadouken, which kills enemies instantly when it makes contact. In Mega Man X2, there's a Shoryuken, which is an uppercut that deals a ton of damage per frame when in contact with an enemy. These are just a few out of many secrets added to their games, meaning there had to be more to discover. Eventually, tools developed where users could dive into the code of games, allowing them to be decompiled and revealing all of their secrets. This leads us to January of 2013, where a user by the name of Miria posted on a forum of a website called the Cutting Room Floor. This site is home to information on developer tools, Easter eggs, and other cut content from video games. Their post read as follows: I found this cheat code while disassembling the game. It lets you create a save file from a few parts of the game. It works on both the Japanese and American releases. The cheat works like this. Make sure you have two controllers plugged into your console, then after selecting New Game and going to the name entry screen, use your second controller to press and hold these buttons, A, Y, L, and R. While these buttons are held, use controller 1 to press up 4 times, right 2 times, down 8 times, and left 1 time. If done correctly, the background will turn red. If it didn't work, you'll have to back out of the screen and try again. If you get the red screen, then you can enter one of these Street Fighter names, each generating a file starting at different locations throughout the game. I even got this to work on my Nintendo Switch while writing out the script, so feel free to try it yourself. While all of these names are neat to use, the important one out of these is the one named DJ. Remember how much needed to be done to beat the game? The DJ code starts you with a full party at level 29, 100,000 gold, and an assortment of items and equipment which includes the 6 magic keys, all while spawned outside is scanned, the fortress where players fight Zog. This is very close to the end of the game, making it much shorter than intended. Now before telling you all how long this run takes, leave a comment below guessing how many minutes you think the run actually is. Remember your guesses. The closest one to the first time I talk about gets a cookie. Moving forward to March 28, 2014, a veteran RPG speedrunner decided to do a run with the DJ save file. The runner's name is Jaseed. Jaseed is better known for his runs and accomplishments in other games, such as helping completely break Phantasy Star 4's any percent speedrun. I actually made a video on this channel about his exploits in that game earlier last year. Now unfortunately he doesn't break the game here, but he does cut the run down to something more manageable. Instead of having to go through everywhere in the game's world, he only needs to do a bit of setup before fighting the game's final bosses. This includes gathering key items to progress what's left of the story, then also grabbing equipment and items like Marble 3 to remove any chance of random encounters. He also obtains all of Ryu's dragon transformations to unlock the true final boss and to complete each encounter with ease. More specifically, he gets the last dragon transformation called Agni. This form trivializes every fight after obtaining it, even to the point where runners simply auto-battle through the bosses. The only variance in these runs comes from getting better damage rolls before obtaining Agni, or having favorable boss actions afterwards, removing the need for additional healing if one is lucky enough in some of these fights. His earliest run, which has a recording, ended up being 55 minutes and 30 seconds long. So if that was your guess from earlier,
congratulations, you won!
Over the next several years, the time would be pushed down by a couple of minutes, thanks to better outcomes on various boss fights. As of the writing of this video, a runner by the name of Wildfireskunk has held the record for almost 3 years now, with a time of 53 minutes and 36 seconds, a time which is close to the current limit of where this category can go. So unless runners can somehow use RNG manipulation, or if they found a new game-breaking glitch, it's possible that Wildfireskunk will have the record for the foreseeable future. If you're curious about doing a run yourself and having one of the mentioned copies of Breath of Fire, try these codes out and use the notes I provided below to do a playthrough, or even see if you can get close to the record. If you do, Tell me how fast your playthrough was. I'd love to know. Special thanks to my patrons who support me on Patreon, and thanks to you for watching and staying hydrated. If you enjoyed, subscribe and then click the button in the middle of your screen for another amazing speedrunning story.